Okay, YouTubers, you've asked for it. Another DasGregor original. As promised. I hope that I can give this story justice, because I can't seem to find the manuscript that I wrote many years ago. So I've kind of written down a little bit of what I can remember. I'm giving it an outline. I'm going to do my best, and I hope you like it. This story I'm going to title, because I can't remember its original title, One Sunday Afternoon. Quinter was upset with life. He was upset with his job, and he was upset with just everything that was happening to him. When he'd get upset, he'd jump into his old 72 Ghia that he'd restored and loved to drive, and he'd go just driving down the countryside. Now, Quinter lived in the beautiful state of Pennsylvania. Many beautiful roads out in the country, many hills, many forests. You have the mountains, the Appalachian Mountains that are there. It's a beautiful area to be out in the country. And Quinter was driving along, just enjoying himself, trying to forget about all his woes and misery back in the real world. He just wanted to enjoy the openness, the beauty that was around him. But suddenly, as Quinter turned the corner, there was, out of nowhere, a man on a horse right in the middle of the road crossing. Quinter swerved to miss him, but unfortunately when he swerved to miss, he lost control of his beautiful Ghia. He ran it right into a tree. He was thrown from the vehicle and knocked unconscious. An uncertain amount of time passed, and Quinter found himself awake in a small wooden bed. There was an older woman standing next to him. She had a rag that she had put on his forehead and was trying to get him to come around. She says to him, "Oh, my dear Lord, I'm so glad. I was so afraid that you'd been taken from us." And dazed, confused, Quinter asked, "Where am I? What happened to me?" "Oh, my poor lad, you were thrown from that contraption, and you came out of nowhere, and you were hit on the head. And if it weren't for Elmer coming and getting me and helping us to get you into our homestead, you might have been lost forever." I'm sorry," he says. "Where am I?" He says, "You're just taken care of for now, so don't worry too much right now." About that time, the swoon of nauseousness overpowered him, and he was out again for a short time. A while later, he awoke again, feeling much more refreshed, feeling much better. He was able to look around him. He noticed he was in a small bedroom. He was in a bed no more than smaller than a normal size bed. It almost looked like it had been handcrafted. And throughout the room, it just looked so old, so quaint. There was a small rocking chair in the corner. There was a quilt on one section, and a small dresser in another corner. There was a small mirror on top of the dresser, and other from these few furnishings, nothing more. Wood paneling walls, and a small window on one side overlooking a beautiful farm. And that was it. Quinter tried to figure out what had happened, but he really couldn't remember much of the accident or anything that happened shortly after. But he began to stir and to get out of bed. And about that time, an elderly man walked into the room, probably in his 60s, which I ought not say is elderly anymore. Let's just say a man in his elder prime. He walked in and he says to Quinter, "I see that you're doing much better, my man. I'm glad that you weren't injured in that strange occurrence. I don't know where you came from, but you just came out of nowhere." Please don't mind my terrible Amish accent. I haven't spent enough time with the Amish to understand them quite right. or to get the accents down. But I'm not too worried about too many of them watching this and criticizing me for it. But any which way, it's not really an Amish accent, it's just a voice. I'll put it that way. But anyway, Elmer went up to Quinter and he says, I'm so glad that you're feeling better. I'm so glad that you weren't too injured. As I said, I didn't know where you came from. You were not there one moment, and I go to cross the road, and all of a sudden there you are being thrown from I don't know what. But I hope you're doing much better now. Quinter's kind of holding his head. He says, yes, I'm doing great now. I feel very good. Ah, good. Then are you hungry, son? Because it's been dinner time. So why don't you come down with me, and I'll introduce you to my wife, and we'll have a bit to eat. Quinter gladly accepted this invitation as he realized that his stomach was growling and he was a bit hungry. So he went downstairs, or I should say, down to the lower level of the home with Elmer, and there was Sarah, sitting there working on dinner. She turns around and says, Hey boys, it's good to see you. Dinner will be ready soon. And Elmer introduces Quinter. He says, Quinter? Does Elmer even know Quinter's name yet? Well, I'm sure in the talking they conversed enough to know whose name was what. And so he says, Quinter, I'd like to introduce you to my wife. This is Sarah. Sarah, this is Quinter. This is the young man. I know who the young man is. I've talked to him before he fell asleep again. I'm sorry, Sarah, Elmer says to her. But I'm glad that all is well, all is good. And I better speed my story up because it's going way too slow for the whole entire thing. But they had a wonderful dinner and a wonderful evening talking to each other. Quinter felt so at home, he felt like maybe this might be somewhere where he belonged for a bit. Which was kind of odd because he had no desire or need to stay, but he had no feelings to go. Elmer says to Quinter, Well, son, it's about time for bed. So I tell you, why don't you just go ahead and stay up there in that room that you've been sleeping in for the last couple of days you've been out? And maybe in the morning you can thank me by helping me out a bit in the farm outside. Quinter gladly accepts his hospitality and thanks him so much for allowing him to stay. The next day, Quinter and Elmer get up very early at the crack of dawn, and they begin to work in the farm, and they work very hard. As it is fall and time for the harvest, Elmer needed much help getting things taken care of and harvesting all his wheat and grain. And Quinter just helped along. He just stayed along with him, learned the ropes, and became quite good at this. And one day turned into 2, and 2 days into 3. Weeks turned into months, and Quinter hadn't really realized that he had become quite close and quite comfortable with Sarah and Elmer. They'd almost become like a family to him. And he didn't even think of his life before, although strangely in the back of his mind, he often thought, what was my life before? One evening as they were sitting by the fire, Elmer says, I thank you so much for all your help. And Sarah, Aye, you've been such a great blessing to my husband and myself as well. I thank you so much for being here with us. We'd like to let you know that you're willing to stay as long as you want. We have no desire to be chasing you off, and we're so happy to have you. But we must tell you one rule. One thing that we have to say. Please, please never pass the road up front. Never cross it, and never go past the fenced-in areas. I can't be telling you what would happen if you did. But it would make us very sad if you left us. Quinter gladly accepted their offer, and he made note of a strange request that I never go past the road or the fence. But he shrugged it off, thinking, it's no big deal. I've got no desire to leave. This is where I belong. This is where my life should be. Years passed and the family was wonderful together. Just the three of them. No one ever came to visit. No one ever left. But there always seemed to be food on the table. There always seemed to be a place for everyone. And there always seemed to be plenty of work to do around the farm. After a few years had passed, Elmer and Quinter were out in the field working. Elmer had gotten to be in his 70s by now, and he wasn't in the best of shape any longer. And one day while they were out in the field, Elmer had a bit of heat stroke, and he fainted to the ground. Quinter ran to him, making sure that he was okay, but he was unconscious. So he grabbed him up and carried him back to the farmhouse as quickly as he could, screaming for Sarah to come. And between the two of them, they were able to get him back up in bed. But he wasn't responding to anything, and Sarah was so afraid of what to do and where to go, and what would they do without Elmer. And the only thing that Quinter could think was, I've got to do something, I've got to go somewhere, I've got to get a doctor, I've got to leave and help this man. He's been my father figure, he's been a father to me, I can't let him go. So he says to Sarah, I'll get somebody, I'll get a doctor, I'll find someone who can help us. And he runs out of the room, Sarah screaming behind him, please, no, we'll be okay, we'll figure it out, please don't leave, no, it'll be alright. But not heeding this warning, Quinter runs out. He runs to the barn. He grabs himself up a horse, one of the plow horses. He jumps on it as quickly as he can, and he begins to gallop down the small street, the driveway, going towards the road. And as he gets to the road, he jumps the fence, just plowing along. And suddenly, out of nowhere, there's a car that comes screaming down the road, screeching to a halt. The horse freaks out, and Quinter's thrown from it and lands on the ground unconscious. A few moments later, there's a man at Quinter's side. We can try. Are you okay, son? Are you all right? What happened? Are you okay? Where did you come from? There was nobody on this road, and suddenly this horse and you were there. And I can't believe it. Please don't sue me. Don't sue me. Quinter's just shaking his head. What happened? Where am I? What's going on? Oh, Elmer needs help. Elmer needs help. He starts shaking at the guy who was helping. Help me. Elmer across the street, he's having a heart attack, he's fainted, I don't know what the matter is, we need a doctor. The man says, calm down, son, calm down. I'm a doctor, I can help. Where did you say this man is? He's just across the street, Quinter says. He's just across the street, please help me. The man helps Quinter to his feet, and they turn, and there's nothing across the street. It's just a meadow. Nothing. Quinter's still thinking, in the farmhouse, that's where we had him. But there is no farmhouse, son. There's nothing across the street but a meadow. No, there's got to be something over there. There's got to be. I've been there for 10, 15 years. There's got to be something. There's nothing over there. Frantic and confused, Quinter runs back across the street. There's remnants of a fence that have been long destroyed. There's a meadow. There's nothing else. He starts trying to find where things were. And as he searches, he finds the remnants of a burned down old farmhouse. He finds the remnants of a few pieces of wood from the barn. And as he searches, he stumbles across a couple gravestones. And frantically, as he looks at these gravestones, he stops in horror. Because as he looks at them, he sees that there is Elmer. And the gravestone says, here lies Elmer Hodges, born 1785, died 1857. A wonderful husband who died of a heart attack. And right next to him, as Quinter's heart beat and fluttered even faster, no, it can't be, he thinks to himself. The next grave says Sarah Hodges, born 1789, died 1858. died of a broken heart. He falls to his knees. Why did I leave? Why did I have to go? These people, they were my family. What will I do without them? Was it all a dream? Was it all a nightmare? What will I do? Did it even happen? He looks at the grave again, and he notices another small inscription towards the bottom, and he brushes away the dirt, and he rubs away at the gravestone, and a small inscription that read, "Quinter, why did you leave us? I was here. I was here," he cries to himself. But how? This can't be right. This says that they died in the 1850s. This is the 21st century. How can it be? How can it be? The doctor comes up to him and says, "I'm sorry. Can I offer you a ride back to town? It looks like you're kind of stranded out here." Quinter gladly accepts the ride and takes the ride back to his town. He gets back to his home. He looks at the paper that's sitting there at his house, and he realizes that the date is still the same. It's still September. It's still the current year. How could he have lived these last 10, 12 years and not realize that not a day had gone by? But it had happened. It had happened. Quinter got a ride back out to the old farmstead. He wanted to look around just one more time. And while he was out there, he noticed that the land was for sale. He wrote down the number and went back to town. And he called the man who had the land. He asked him how long he'd had it, and he said he'd only had it for 5 or 10 years. It had been in the family up until the late mid-1800s, and then it had just been sitting there for the longest of time. He bought it in an auction, didn't know what to do with it, but decided he didn't want it. Quinter decided to buy that land. He bought it. He restored the farmhouse. He restored the barn. He put everything back to exactly the way that he knew it had been, in memory of Elmer and Sarah. And then he had found his purpose in his life, because he reopened the farm and he turned it into for lack of a better term, a halfway house for those who were lost, who didn't know where they wanted to go and didn't know what they should be doing. People would come and people would go. They would help out on the farm for a bit, some with the harvest, some with the planting, some with the animals. They'd find a quiet, peaceful place of tranquility to rest, relax, find themselves, and find their purpose in life and move on. Quinter worked at this for many, many years until he was old and ready to die. He never married, he never had any children, but his one request when he did die was that he be buried next to Elmer and Sarah, and that the inscription read, "I remembered and never left you. You are always, always in my heart." Wow, that was a pretty interesting story for me to tell, because I really kind of got wrapped up into that one a bit. And it's probably very, very long, so I'll keep this short and stop at this point. and get this encoded and posted. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it's not too long of a story. I really look forward to your comments. It's not like what I wrote, but it's very close to it. Anyway, I hope you like it. I apologize for some of the discrepancies that are in the middle of there and my asides that I speak in the middle of my story as I remember that I've left a loophole or something wrong with it. But anyway, enjoy it, and I hope to hear from many of you, and I hope you like it. So, thanks. Bye-bye.